Mr. Dev Bajpai, Whole-Time Director HUL and VP Legal for South Asia and Unilever. Now over to Mr. Dev Bajpai. He has been a member of the management committee of HUL since May 2010 and was inducted on the board of directors of HUL as a whole-time director with effect from January 2017. And Mr. Dev has over 30 years of experience in diverse industries, including automobile, FMCG, hospitality, and private equity in the areas of legal, governance, tax and corporate affairs. And in the past, he's worked with companies like Maruti Udyog Limited, Marico, Indian Hotels Company, ICICI Venture Funds Management Company, and so on. He also is a member of the Institute of Company Secretaries of India and has a law degree from the University of Delhi. He's completed an executive program for corporate counsels at Harvard, conducted by the Harvard Law School. Such eminent personalities here with us on stage, and with respect to the discussion that we have, the opening plenary session is on making GCS equal partners with the government, regulators, policymakers, and key decision makers, right from drafting legislation to consultations on decisions impacting lives and communities, the way ahead. So, sir, the stage is all yours, and we are looking forward to your nuggets of wisdom and advice and knowledge.
Good morning, everyone. At HUL, we have now moved to 1.5 pages of Word document and not any PowerPoint presentations. So I'm not going to make any PowerPoint presentation today, but I'll share my views with you. I think the subject is quite vast. Role of GCs as collaborators, partners with government, regulators, and not just confined to drafting legislation. By the way, that is the most tough, it's a very tough job, to impacting communities and lives of people and the way forward. So it's a very, very topical subject. It's very extensive in its scope, and there's so much of work that you can do if you really choose to work in this particular area. But before I get to the heart of the subject, I think it's important to set the context. And Vivek, my friend, alluded to the evolving role of general counsels. But I've seen this through. In the last 30 years, I've seen this. I have lived it, I've experienced it. So from a role of being a functional expert to an out-of-box thinker, or from being someone who's confined to litigation management, compliance management, IP management, to actually looking at growth and savings, which comes at a premium in today's world, is evolution of the role and in the right direction. And I've experienced it, I've seen it, I've practiced it, and I'm getting my team to do it. And I would urge all of you to do it, and I'll give you a few examples. I'll also share with you what we do at HUL. And I'm very happy that Akriti's picked this up. We had a few conversations on advocacy, and I felt that this community has a big role to play when it comes to advocacy, and I'm glad that she's picked this up. And Legal Era is transiting from being a first-class publication for legal professionals into a much more meaningful and more exhaustive role of promoting advocacy on regulation, on thought leadership on regulation, etc. So that's very happy for you, Akriti, for taking this, playing an active role in leading this change. But coming back to our subject, and I said that I want to set the context. One is the role of the GC, which I just briefly talked about. The other is the external environment. It's a very, very challenging external environment. We have all heard of the VUCA world. You know, VUCA is a phrase which was coined by the American Army after the end of the Cold War. It stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. But what has now come about is a Bani world. And Bani is something which has been coined by an American anthropologist and futurist, Jamas Casio. He says it's a Bani world. Bani stands for brittle, anxious, non-linear, and incomprehensible. And this is so profound and so correct. If you look at what's happened post-COVID, when it was COVID, we were made to change the way we shop, the way we consume data, the way we deal with consumers. Those who are in the consumer goods sector would know this. And the growth that we were expecting in about 3 or 4 years happened in a year because it was everything. And then this was followed by the war. which is again, while it impacts the countries that go on war, but now in today's world, in 21st century, it impacts pretty much the entire globe. So the kind of supply chain issues, complexities, difficulties, challenges that we've come across the world, and it's not just an Indian phenomenon, is absolutely difficult and very, very difficult to navigate through for the business. And this is where supply chains across the world have been tested for their agility and resilience. So it's pretty much a Bani world. Bani because it is brittle. It is brittle because businesses which seemingly look strong and sturdy are actually very brittle and they fall apart very soon. It is anxious because it's not just at a personal level but also at a people think about their jobs, people think about their businesses. So anxiety is actually driving decision making, and it is non-linear because there is no linearity now. The set structures don't exist, and you can't think long term because you don't know in what way you will get impacted. And incomprehensible, the war is an example of the world being completely incomprehensible. Who would expect that in the 21st century you will have a war like this? Yeah, so this is pretty much, I completely can relate, and I assume all of you can relate to what Jamas Cassius said about the world. VUCA still had degrees of sane approach to things. You could fix the VUCA world in some ways, but a Bani world is something which is out of your control. And people who think that they are controlling everything just don't control things, and that's why you have things like the war. Anyways, so that's the external environment, and in that external environment, now if I come back to the subject, I think the GC community and the legal fraternity as a whole has a huge role to play. And I think the role has, like I said, has changed, and it has changed for the good, and there is a greater expectation now, not just in being recipients of compliance in our organizations, but actually co-creating regulation. And the government today, I can tell you from my personal experience, is actually looking forward for stakeholders to come forward and help them craft the right regulation. Regulations never get crafted the right way the first time around. And if we all play a role in co-creating regulation, it becomes far more meaningful than being left with a regulation which would ordinarily then change after 10 years. Many of the acts actually say that they will get reviewed after 10 years. Yeah, so there is no point being just recipients of certain regulation and complying with it or going to court to say that it is not good. Instead, it is far more relevant for all of us to play a far more proactive role in co-creating regulation. And there are enough and many examples in my personal journey. For many years now, I've been playing that role, and I have now realized that there is great attraction with people like Akriti, who are ambassadors of this. I'm very happy that this is gaining traction. But it's important. It's very, very important because in every area, there would be some regulatory challenge which is at the heart of an issue, irrespective of the industry. More often than not, it is a regulatory issue that brings up. And then what are the options you have? You have an option either to go to court to say that the regulation is bad and please quash it, or you have an option to correct it in the long run by really getting into the meat of it and understanding how the regulation can be changed. And the more you think of it as taking into account the interests of all stakeholders, most importantly the government, then you are likely to receive more appreciation from the government of your point of view, and then things can move forward. Because it's easy to criticize the government all the time. At the end of the day, they are also a set of people like us who've had their own journey, and they come out with regulations which many of us feel that they are not good, but they have their own compulsions, and there are so many other interests that they have to balance. But if we as the GC community were to put ourselves in their seat and then think of how could this be made more meaningful, I can tell you that the regulations can be of a different order. Today, regulations are made by the government keeping the least common denominator in mind. They don't look at things like most compliant companies, next level of compliance companies, least compliant companies. Ideally, regulations should be an incentive for least compliant companies to get to the middle level and then to the top level. And therefore, the degrees of compliance should come down proportionately. If you're most compliant, you should be required to comply least because you're already most compliant. But this requires a lot of hard work, which oftentimes people in the government are not willing to do because they don't have that perspective. And that is why I think the role, Vivek also talked about us being bridge. I completely agree with it. He talked about us being in the drafting committee. I agree with that. I mean, that's a role that will be hugely value adding for a legal community and for GCs. So I'll just share with you what we have been doing at HUL on this subject. We have something which we unleashed about 7 years back in 2015. We have a legal strategy, and that legal strategy it's called Winning Decisively, and that has 7 charters. One of the charter is proactively addressing legislative changes, and that's internally we call it Project Chanakya. And what we do there is we have a regulatory funnel approach. We look at all the regulations that impact our industry, and we put them into a regulatory funnel. Then we look at what is the regulation, which are the areas where regulation does not exist, and therefore where can law become a source of competitive advantage for the industry. So should we have a regulation in that particular field? Then we have another level where we look at regulations exist but they are suboptimal, so they require amendment. They need to be changed because they have not kept pace with the changes in technology and with the digitization of the economy. And third, which is a very small list, is of regulations that are optimum. So when we deploy that regulatory funnel approach, we constantly keep reviewing what regulation is where, what do we need to do. And we have regulatory Chanakya pods. So we've got 7-8 areas which we have identified in consultation with the business, and I get my team to lead one of those pods. And we have Chanakya calls, which are bi-weekly calls, where we discuss progress, and we look at, and we never take a view that we know it all. So we'll rely on external resources. We look at who is the subject matter expert in this area. We get their inputs. We get them to come and talk to us. We go and send our people to those organizations. And then we have very good association with the trade associations, which is the apex level trade associations as well as the state level trade associations, because they are the ones who would really carry these things to the government. And just to give you 1 or 2 examples of where this approach has helped us, for our industry, FMCG, Drugs and Cosmetics Act is a very important act. It's a functional law that applies to personal care industry, and for years cosmetics have been subjected to the same level of rigor and restrictions as drugs have been. By one stroke of a pen, they amended the law and added cosmetics to drugs, and ever since then it has been as restrictive so far as cosmetics and personal care is concerned as drugs have been. And we have been advocating with the government for a long time that cosmetics need a more liberal regime for the right reasons. And there are examples of many countries, the Western world, the developed markets, and also the ASEAN countries where cosmetics don't go through any pre-licensing, pre-marketing licensing. They are all subject to post-marketing notification. And with a lot of advocacy, we've been able to get the government to form a committee. And the committee has looked into a new cosmetic law as things would have it. As I said, you don't get it correct the first time, so you have to be at it. They came out with some regulation which we feel is not as good. We don't want to lose this opportunity because we feel that the potential of personal care industry in the country is huge. It's a huge industry and it can grow significantly. It's been growing at a CAGR of 8 to 10%, and it can grow at the same level or higher level. But it has to be got rid of these restrictions that it has to suffer through, because every variant that you introduce in the market has to go through this process, and your speed to market goes back a lot by 6 months, by 8 months, because every FD has to look at it and then give you a license. So that's just one example, but if it helps the entire industry. So the point I'm trying to make is that today the situation, the expectation from the present dispensation is that stakeholders like the industry will play a very significant role in shaping regulation. Almost 50 to 60% of my time is spent in this area. Even yesterday I was in a virtual meeting with one of the secretaries to Government of India someone talked about legal metrology. Yes, it's become a big issue. And the week before that, I was with the health secretary because the issues are in drugs and cosmetics. Then there are issues in advertising. I mean, there are so many issues. But the good news is that the government is ready and willing to hear the industry out. There could be one odd issues where something has come about without not enough consultation. But by and large, the approach of the government has been that they are ready and willing to hear. And they are expecting us to play that role. So the way forward for this subject is that we play a very, very active role. And there can't be a better time than this. So with the evolution of the role that the general counsels have, the expectation of our business partners would also be that we play a role in the growth agenda of the company. We have to have a legal agenda which is tied to the business agenda. And it just cannot be the responsibility of only the business people to think of ideas. I mean, no one stops you from having your own growth ideas. I mean, it is our own thinking that lawyers feel that we can't contribute to our growth journey. I can give you examples in my company where lawyers have done that. And I have absolutely no doubt that the lawyers, if they are integrated well, if they understand the business well, the levers that drive our business, they will have many ideas to support growth and savings agenda of the company. So that's what I wanted to share. I think I don't want to take much time, but I think this is a fabulous topic that you've chosen. I think time has come for general counsels and the larger legal teams below the general counsels to really play a meaningful role in advocacy, in shaping regulation rather than just being silent recipients of any regulation which may be half-baked and which may then take a lot of your time to sort out either in the courts or wait for the amendments to come. So great opportunity for the lawyers to really broaden their repertoire and learn more things and contribute in a much more meaningful way. There's also another aspect of lives and communities which your subject line talks about, and I'll probably spend a minute or two on that. Look, at HUL we have operated in the country for the last 90 years with two core philosophies, and we say that what is good for India is good for HUL, and doing well by doing good, and we literally mean it. We are a middle class. We like to be seen as a middle class company which has a middle class value system, and we can relate to the middle class of our country, and therefore we make products that cater largely to the middle class. And in doing that, we recognize and realize that we also have to grow like any business has to grow. We rely on the 4G growth model, which is consistent growth, competitive growth, profitable growth, and more importantly, responsible growth. And responsible growth, when you talk about responsible growth, you have to take into account the interests of consumers, customers, society, community, and that's what we do with our sustainability agenda. Now, in this, I think the general counsels have again a very important role. There are so many things that are happening. ESG is one very big example. You have a session later in the day on ESG. It's a very topical subject, and I think general counsels have an important role to play because the BRSR is based on the 9 principles of the guidelines on responsible business conduct, which again come back from the UN Charter. And in those, if you look at the reporting framework, it's a very, very exhaustive reporting framework. It has about 140 parameters on which listed companies have to report, out of which about 98 are essential and 30 odd are leadership criteria. But they get into nitty-gritties to a level which we have not seen in the past. But that's where I think there's a great opportunity for GCs to really work closely with the business, with the governance team, and there is huge amount of synergy for those GCs here who are also company secretaries and look after governance. There's huge amount of synergy between the two functions, and there is great opportunity to really understand what it means, start doing things which we may not be doing. There are many organizations who are already quite ahead in the journey, but then they don't report as much, because reporting here becomes very, very important. So things like CSR, ESG, although they are completely mutually exclusive and there's no real connection in, so to say, but are important areas for GCs to really dwell on and spend time on. So with that, thank you very much for inviting me and giving me an opportunity to share my views.